So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. On the hope and climate change front, it's been a summer of encroaching despair. Just 2 weeks ago, the French Minister of the Environment unexpectedly quit the Macron government. "I can't lie to myself anymore," Nicolas Hulot told the stunned radio audience. "I don't want my presence in the government to give the illusion that we're facing up to such stakes. Have we started to reduce our CO2 emissions? No. Have we started to reduce our use of pesticides? No. To prevent the erosion of our biodiversity? No. I don't understand that we are witnessing the gestation of a tragedy with indifference," Hulot said. Part of my personal encounter with despair was the release of Nathaniel Rich's stunning article in the New York Times magazine, August 1st. The magazine devoted its entire issue to the story Losing Earth, the decade we almost stopped climate change. Now, I'm a discerning enough reader to know that we haven't lost Earth. That's ridiculous. My takeaway from the article is that we have lost the possibility of limiting warming to a 1.5 degrees Celsius target, and that we lost that struggle back in the years 1979 to 1989. So this is an episode about what radical hope looks like when you come up to a desired target only to see it recede past you beyond hope of ever reaching it again. My name is Lowell Bliss. Welcome to episode 35 of the Liberator Today's video series on hope. We are going to turn to Major League Baseball and to one exceptional player in particular, but I don't want to trivialize the devastation of missing targets. For example, climate change is not a game for the island nation of the Maldives. I have visited the Maldives. Its average elevation is 1 meter above sea level. When now deposed President Mohammed Nasheed went to the COP21 climate summit in Copenhagen, he pleaded with the other nations. Anything above a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming will result in a sea level rise which will cause the extinction of my country. The Paris Climate Agreement, birthed 7 years later, saw fit to mention the 1.5 degree target. It was too insensitive, too despairing not to. But the agreement holds it out as an ambition. The true target is 2 degrees Celsius warming above pre-industrial levels. But as I have already mentioned in this series, the total of the nation's nationally determined contributions, what are called NDCs for short, does not add up to preventing a 2.5 degree warming, let alone a 2 degree one. And then the further bad news that no major industrialized nation, not France, not Germany, not Canada, no country is on track to meet their targets. Here is a statement which we must make. Each 0.5 degree increase in warming is worth fighting against. Because the amount of warming, the amount of suffering of our fellow human beings, the amount of devastation of ecosystems is increased exponentially. For example, the scientists at Climate Central unveiled their Surging Seas project at COP21. I caught their presentation. They know the topography of the planet coastlines and the cities that we've built along them. They also know the extent of sea level rise through the thermal expansion of the oceans. Water molecules expand when heated. And through the added water from glacial and ice pack melt. That is ice that once was on land but has now slid into the oceans. So for example, they can map out which city blocks in San Francisco or Calcutta or Tianjin would be underwater. They also know that if average global temperatures reach a certain level, that locks in a certain level of sea level rise. Well, there is no way of knowing when exactly that sea level rise will be experienced. To illustrate this, the lead scientist had a big block of ice brought into our meeting room, the lecture hall of the National Oceanographic Society of France. We all know, he told us, that this block of ice now in the room will eventually melt. We simply cannot say whether it will be completely melted in 1 hour, or 2, or 2.5. Fair enough. But mind you, he said, nonetheless, the melting, the sea level rise is locked in the moment the temperature threshold is crossed. If under our current business as usual scenario, average global temperatures reach 4 degrees Celsius warming, Climate Central projects that 600 million people will be displaced and millions more affected even beforehand due to increased storm surges and flooding. If, however, we can keep warming to the 2 degrees Celsius target, that number of people displaced is cut by half. And if we could keep it down to 1.5, that number is halved again. Each 0.5 degree target, even if we must grieve the loss of the lower targets, is worth fighting for. We may be entering a period of great despair as it becomes first obvious that the 1.5 degree target is beyond our reach, and then when it begins to seem unlikely that the 2.0 degree target is reachable. People may be in danger of giving up. Orel Hershiser. He was a pitcher for 17 years in the major leagues, most notably for the Los Angeles Dodgers. 3 times All-Star, Cy Young Award winner, World Series champ, MVP. In 1988, he set a major league record by pitching 58 consecutive innings without allowing a single run. He was phenomenal. In 1990, Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator George Will wrote a book, Men at Work, The Craft of Baseball. He devotes an entire chapter of interviews with Hershiser, and entitled that chapter, The Pitcher, Orel Hershiser, in the Perfect Future Tense. In the future perfect tense, excuse me. Well, what does he mean by that? We can ask what makes a good pitcher great. George Will first quotes catcher Rick Dempsey about what makes a good pitcher bad. Dempsey says there are pitchers who, when you score a run off them, you can see you've ruined their perfect game. They lose their competitive edge. And then the dam breaks and they give up 6, 7 runs. Will asks Hershiser if, when he goes to the mound in the first inning, if he plans to pitch a complete game. That is, all 9 innings, all 7 outs. No, Hershiser replies. He goes into a game planning to pitch a perfect game, which is a complete game where no opposing batter ever makes it to first base, either as the result of a hit or a walk or being struck with the ball. It's a perfect game for the pitcher. In the 140 years of professional baseball, in over 210,000 games, there have been only 23 perfect games ever pitched. Last one was in 2012. As an aside, Orel Hershiser is not on that list. Nonetheless. So, then what happens, Mr. Hershiser, if you do find an opposing batter on first base? If, as Rick Dempsey had explained, a batter gets past you and you have your perfect day ruined. Do you lose your competitive edge? Does the dam burst and then suddenly you give up 6, 7 runs? Hershiser explains, if they get a hit, then I am throwing a one-hitter. If they get a walk, it's my last walk. I deal with perfection to the point that it is logical to conceive it. History is history. The future is perfect. Consider all the targets that Hershiser can imagine. He starts with a vision for a perfect game. If the batter walks, he lost the perfect game target, but he can still hope for a no-hitter. If someone gets a hit, then he can hope that the runner never advances. Hershiser hopes for what's called a shutout. If a batter scores, well, then he can hope to keep it to a 1-run game, or then a 2 runs, and so on. In fact, Hershiser ended the 1988 champion season with an earned run average of 2.26. This is what George Will labels the future perfect tense. We deal with perfection to the point that it is logical to conceive it. History is history. The future is perfect. The stakes are much higher with climate change than with many of the other things that I suspect you are bringing hope and despair to. If Hershiser ended up losing a game, he could always say, that's history. There's always my next inning. If the Dodgers blow the season, he could always say, as the old Brooklyn Dodgers did before him, wait till next year. When it comes to climate change targets, we leaders need to doubly equip ourselves with the future perfect tense. 1.5, 2.0 are worth fighting for, and will have been worth fighting for if we must let them go. But so will 2.5 and 3.0 if heaven forbid it should come to that. Hope gives us courage to never give up. Next week we begin the story of Plenty Coups, the last great chief of the Crow people. The book we'll use for his biography is in fact entitled Radical Hope. I'm Lowell Bliss, Christian environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.